The morning should have been perfect, crisp air rolling across the lake, the sun sending its first golden streaks over the water while my son Noah carried his little tackle box like it was treasure. His enthusiasm had been building all week, ever since I promised to teach him the right way to bait a hook and cast without tangling his line. Fishing had always been a family ritual, passed from grandfather to father to me and now to Noah, and it felt like one of those moments you remember years later, the quiet of dawn, the ripples across the water, and the peaceful connection between father and son. For the first 30 minutes it was everything I imagined. Noah sorted his lures carefully, I showed him proper grip and casting stance, and we laughed whenever his hook slapped the surface instead of sailing out far like he wanted. Then, just when the world seemed calm enough to forgive every stress of my week, Noah's eyes widened and pointed behind me, and the crunch of tires and squeal of a golf cart's brakes shattered the quiet. A white HOA patrol cart slid onto the dock path like it was raiding a crime scene, 3 passengers spilling out with the urgency of SWAT officers. At the front was Gloria Hale, the 55-year-old HOA president who had long enjoyed parading her authority around the neighborhood like it was crown and scepter. She was flanked by 2 neighbors, one of them already raising a phone to live stream the so-called raid to the community group chat. "Put that rod down right now," she screamed at me, her voice slicing through the air, and for a second I thought surely she couldn't be serious because all I had in my hands was a fishing pole, but the look in her eyes carried the conviction of someone who had already judged and sentenced me. Noah froze at my side, frightened that our simple trip had turned into some sort of public spectacle. Gloria marched forward in her navy blazer as if she were storming a stage. "Mr. Bennett," she barked, making my stomach churn with how easily she used my name as though she wanted the spectators online to realize she knew exactly who her target was. "You are in direct violation of community regulations." I blinked, confused, holding up my valid state fishing license, assuming there must be some mistake. She never even looked at it. "This has nothing to do with the state," she sneered. "This is about respect for community standards, and you are fishing before the designated quiet hours end." I checked my watch. It was 7:30 a.m., a time that might as well be midday to any outdoorsman, but she treated it like I had unleashed fireworks in a nursery. The neighbor with the phone panned closer, narrating, "Catching a violator in the act, HOA enforcement at its finest." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but Noah tugged at my sleeve, whispering if we were in trouble, his little voice tight with fear, and the anger in me hardened. Gloria, sensing her stage, whipped out a folded citation on thick paper, practically pre-printed with my name, and shoved it toward me with a smirk. "You are fined $150 for violation plus $450 in processing fees. $600 total, payable to the association within 7 days." I stared at the paper, shocked at the comedy of calling 30 minutes of fishing with a licensed rod an emergency worth $600. Gloria's grin widened as neighbors in the livestream comments flamed to life, some cheering her strictness while others were clearly confused why this mattered at all. When I raised my voice to say this was excessive, she dialed her phone right there on the dock, announcing for her audience, "Since you refuse cooperation, I am calling 911. We cannot allow dangerous individuals to ignore rules." I couldn't believe it. Dangerous? For fishing? Noah's rod slipped from his trembling hands to the dock with a loud clatter, and my heart broke watching him think his father was about to be handcuffed for teaching him something as innocent as casting a line. The 3 HOA enforcers stood like we were fugitives caught red-handed, glares fixed, waiting for sirens. And then sure enough, within 15 minutes, flashing lights cut through the trees and 2 police cars rolled into view. Out stepped 2 officers, one older with tired eyes and gray temples, one younger with hands twitching toward cuffs like he was aching for action. Gloria rushed to them, waving her citation, spitting words about trespassing and community violations, pointing to me and my son like we were criminals ready to flee. The young cop reached for cuffs. Noah burst out sobbing, lures spilled from his tackle box scattering rainbow colors across the dock planks, and the live streamer whispered commentary about justice being served. My throat locked for a second, wondering just how far Gloria could push this circus, until the older officer raised his hand, taking in the scene. A trembling boy clutching his dad's arm, a simple rod and box of lures, a glaring woman making a federal case out of the morning air. He asked measured questions, read my state license, frowned at Gloria's theatrics, and sighed with the weariness of someone who had been called here before. "Sir, your license is current, your fishing is legal. This is an HOA issue, not a criminal one." Gloria objected, practically shaking with rage, waving laminated HOA rules like they were the Constitution, quoting section numbers about quiet hours the way a zealot shouts scripture. The senior officer ignored her, The younger reluctantly lowered his cuffs. Relief washed through me in that moment, but the damage had already been done. Noah clung to me, crying, asking if I'd be taken away, his trust in the safety of morning fishing shattered. And as Gloria fumed that the police weren't doing their jobs, demanding rule breakers be punished, I felt something else harden inside me. This wasn't about peace, it wasn't about quiet hours, it was about power, about humiliation, about reminding the neighborhood she ruled unchecked. That silly piece of paper demanding $600 wasn't just a fine, it was a weapon, a distraction hiding something bigger. The way she smirked as I folded it into my pocket told me she thought she'd already won, that she had embarrassed me in front of my son and the entire neighborhood livestream audience. But I wasn't about to walk away humiliated. That night, as Noah slept uneasy and Rachel asked what kind of place we were raising our family in, I sat down at my desk with my laptop and the HOA citation lying flat before me, and I started digging. I pulled property tax records, community finance filings, and public debt notices, using the same investigative instincts I honed back when I worked in journalism. Within an hour the cracks started showing: red overdue stamps on maintenance bills, 6-month late payments to Clearwater Lake Management totaling $15,000. The association was drowning in debt even as Gloria pretended to rule with authority. She was hiding serious problems from neighbors while she made a circus out of a father on a dock. I spread the papers across my desk like puzzle pieces, and I realized this staged humiliation wasn't the climax, it was the first move in a bigger war. They had tried to fine me $600 for teaching my son to fish. Before this ended, I was going to flip the entire board over. If Gloria wanted a battle, she had just declared it. That night after the fishing fiasco, when Noah finally cried himself to sleep and Rachel sat silently next to me on the couch with that hollow look in her eyes, I took the ridiculous $600 citation and pinned it to the wall of my office like it was a hunting trophy, not because I wanted to admire it but because I wanted to keep reminding myself of what this was really about, a power play by someone who thrived on control, not a genuine concern for peace. So I opened my laptop, logged into county databases, property records, and anything else I could access with my background in journalism, and I started digging the way a hound digs when it smells something buried, and within an hour I had found enough rot under the shiny surface of our HOA to make my stomach turn. There, in bright red stamps across scanned documents, was proof that our association owed Clearwater Lake Management over $15,000 in unpaid bills, half a year overdue, and yet not once had Gloria Hale told residents at our meetings or newsletters that the lake itself was days away from being repossessed, revoked, or cut off completely. No, she had hidden it while parading around docks handing people fraudulent fines for enjoying the very amenity she had failed to keep afloat. I stared across my desk at bank letters, overdue notices, and alerts from Clearwater threatening to terminate the lake use contract and open it to outside groups unless payment was made, and I realized then that the $600 fine slapped on me was not only a way to flex her fabricated authority but to distract everyone from the storm she had engineered. What she didn't know was that between the inheritance my grandmother left me when she passed 3 months earlier and savings from my investigative work, I had the resources to pay off that debt if I wanted to, and suddenly what had begun as humiliation on a Saturday morning at the dock was transforming into a chess game I never planned to play. The following week the drama escalated in every direction. Gloria doubled down, posting copies of my citation on the community bulletin board like wanted posters, whispering at neighbors with passive smirks when Rachel walked past with groceries, organizing her cronies to gossip that my family was dangerous rule breakers, threatening the quiet beauty of the neighborhood. But what really cracked the illusion came when I received a call from Amanda, the HOA's administrative assistant, with a voice that trembled like she expected her words to be heard. Through hidden microphones, "Mr. Bennett," she whispered, "I can't keep doing this. She makes me forge signatures, minutes of meetings that never happened, fake votes. It's all lies. She's even been using association funds for herself. And when I asked if she had proof, she invited me to meet off-site, 20 minutes away in a small coffee shop where she leaned across the table with shadows under her eyes and slid me a flash drive that rattled against the mug as if it were contraband being smuggled in wartime, and inside that little stick were months of doctored documents, forged HOA decision papers, invoices paid directly to Gloria's personal account, and the most unsettling folder of all, surveillance photos of me and Noah fishing, time-stamped, cataloged for months, evidence she had been stalking and stockpiling to create a paper trail of violations long before our confrontation. I drove home with that flash drive sitting on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb, heart pounding not only from outrage but from anticipation, because now I had leveraged tangible proof that her authority was a castle of cards built on fraud, and if she pushed me again I could send the whole thing crashing down. Instead of hitting back immediately, I decided to wait, to collect more, to build the kind of airtight case that could withstand not only HOA hearings but county courtrooms, because if my grandmother taught me anything it was that the loudest hunter isn't the one who wins, it's the one who waits for the clean shot. In the days that followed, her harassment intensified to absurd levels. Anonymous complaints filed with code enforcement about the height of our lawn, which was perfectly trimmed, zoning complaints about my pickup being parked in my own driveway, even a business inspector showing up because someone claimed I was illegally running a company out of the garage. Every one of them shrugged and apologized when they saw the truth but admitted legally they had to respond to every complaint submitted. And of course the complaints all traced back in style and timing to Gloria's desk. I reinforced my front gate with steel rods, I mounted high-resolution cameras under the eaves and in tree lines, and I set up a bait zone near my shed with equipment positioned where trespassers would be sure to notice, because I knew it was only a matter of time before she left the safety of her golf cart and crossed the line physically. That time came before the week was out when my cameras captured her at dawn, creeping along the fence in heels with bolt cutters in one hand, hammer in the other, jamming a makeshift wood sign into my lawn painted in red letters, "No hunting zone, authorized," and the absurdity of it would have been funny if Noah hadn't seen footage of it with wide fearful eyes, asking if she was coming to take our house next. Cameras recorded every angle, the bolt cutters chewing through my fence posts, the hammer pounding her fraudulent sign, her phone raised to theatrically call 911 and claim I was armed and dangerous, all of it time-stamped, stored on multiple drives, and by the time patrol cars pulled up again with sirens and weary expressions, I was calmly waiting with coffee in hand, laptop open and ready to play back her performance. Officer Martinez, the same weary man with graying temples who had sighed through her first theatrics, stopped in his tracks when he saw the footage of Gloria herself vandalizing my fence, staging signs, and dialing 911 seconds later to accuse me of crimes. His young partner turned red when they realized they had almost cuffed a man on the word of the very woman committing the crime. The power in the moment was electric. Gloria sputtered accusations of video tampering while neighbors live-streamed her making a fool of herself, but in that instant, I knew the tide had shifted. She thought the fine was a weapon. I had turned it into a blade pointing back at her. I never said out loud the plan forming in my mind, but as I looked at Noah that night, curled tightly in his blanket as if still fearing uniforms arriving to drag his dad away, I promised myself one thing. This wasn't just about fishing anymore, it wasn't just about my dignity or even the neighbors who had suffered her arbitrary fines, it was about breaking the illusion of untouchable power she had wrapped herself in for years, and I was going to dismantle it layer by rotten layer. She wrote me a $600 citation, but I was about to write her a chapter in history that she'd never erase. The debt, the fraud, the lies, the cameras, I had the ammunition. All I needed now was patience. I couldn't stop staring at the stack of overdue notices spread across my desk, the bright red stamps practically glowing under the lamp, the words final warning and termination circled like flashing neon signs of weakness, and as Rachel passed behind me, setting a hand on my shoulder, her voice steady even though her eyes betrayed exhaustion, she asked, "What if you could solve this? What if this whole mess is something you can stop, not by fighting her on her rules but by breaking them completely?" That sentence sparked something in me, a reminder of my grandmother's words written in her will about using her inheritance wisely to protect the people I loved, and the money sitting untouched in my account suddenly stopped feeling like savings and started feeling like a weapon. While Gloria preened around town slapping fines and basking in livestream theatrics, I realized she had let the one thing she was supposed to protect slip right through her fingers. The contract with Clearwater Lake Management, the very thing keeping this neighborhood's crown jewel, the lake, accessible, and now they were done waiting. I called Clearwater's regional office the next morning, half expecting them to dismiss me as just another angry homeowner, but when I explained I lived in Meadowbrook, the man on the other end released a long sigh of recognition, spoke of months of broken promises and empty threats from the HOA president, letters sent, calls ignored, and finally said, "Frankly, Mr. Bennett, we're sick of it. They're $15,000 behind, and at this point, we'd prefer to deal with anyone who actually pays their bill." That's when the board flipped upside down. I told them I could clear the debt immediately today, and in response they offered something I never imagined possible. An exclusive 99-year contract transferring full control of lake usage and access from the HOA to me, one individual resident who chose to step up when the government of the cul-de-sac collapsed under vanity and arrogance. My heart beat fast as I sat in their office, pen in hand, reviewing language that made it explicitly clear I would have the power to set rules, issue bans, and protect this lake how I saw fit. Rachel squeezed my hand when she saw the clause that prohibited HOA interference forever due to breach of fiduciary responsibility. She whispered, "Justin, this is it, You just turned their weapon into your shield. The transfer was finalized 2 days later, wires sent, contracts signed, and my name inked onto a 99-year authority that stretched far beyond Gloria's loud voice or her cronies' live streams. The irony made me chuckle half the time I looked at the papers. She tried to humiliate me with a $600 fine, and I answered by buying out her entire source of power. Meanwhile, oblivious and desperate, Gloria escalated in ways that would be laughable if they weren't so dangerous. She began hanging forged documents around the neighborhood, fake orders printed with counterfeit federal seals claiming the Department of Wildlife had prohibited fishing and boating due to my illegal activities, waving them around during HOA meetings like they were gospel written by gods of bureaucracy, demanding special assessments for lake maintenance that never happened, while funneling money straight to her account, adding insult by targeting children like Noah with vandalism and whispers that his father was a criminal. Rachel caught him late one night scrubbing the words "lake thief" off his backpack with a rag, tears streaking his face, and something in me snapped then. What had been a quiet investigative project suddenly became a mission, not just to weather the storm but to end it and ensure no family, no child in this cul-de-sac, ever endured what mine had. I spent evenings cross-referencing Amanda's flash drive with Clearwater's records, printing every forged invoice, highlighting every embezzled payment, stacking testimony from residents like George Miller and Mrs. Chen who had quietly shared with me stories of Gloria's arbitrary targeting. By the time the next emergency HOA meeting was convened in the community center, a meeting she had orchestrated to smear me further with photoshopped evidence of my fishing trip blown up on a projector, I carried a manila folder that weighed less than a pound but could bury her throne 6 feet deep. The room was packed, neighbors restless, her supporters circling like sharks ready to jeer, phones held high to capture another viral humiliation. Gloria strutted to the podium in her navy blazer, laser pointer in hand like she was conducting a high-level investigation, and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we deal with lawlessness," flashing cropped photos of Noah and I on the dock, twisting our peaceful morning into an image of chaos. I waited, let her whip herself into a frenzy, watched neighbors shifting uncomfortably as they realized how over-the-top this performance was becoming, then slowly stood. The room hushed. I lifted my folder, placed it on the front table, and said, "Before you finish burying me with lies, maybe you should explain this." Sliding copies of overdue letters, proof of $15,000 in debt, and my signed contract with Clearwater across the wood. Gasps rippled, phones angled to record, Gloria's face froze like she had seen a ghost rise in the room. "This lake," I said calmly, "is no longer under HOA control. The debt is cleared. Clearwater has removed your authority. For the next 99 years, this water belongs to me." The silence cracked like a rifle shot, neighbors erupting into whispers, some cheering, some too stunned to speak. She lunged for the documents, calling them fake, her hand trembling as she waved forged prohibition orders of her own, demanding everyone ignore me, insisting federal orders superseded my contract. But in that exact moment the doors at the back of the hall opened and in walked George Miller with a small team of federal investigators I had already alerted with Amanda's evidence. Their lead officer held up one of Gloria's fakes, pointing out the counterfeit seals while stating clearly for all to hear, "Ma'am, forging federal documents is a federal crime." Her face drained of blood, sweat forming at her temples, her supporters quietly pocketing phones and stepping back to avoid association. And still she stammered threats about lawsuits, even as neighbors booed, even as reporters whispered into phones that the HOA queen had fallen from her throne. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I simply placed the signed Clearwater contract high on the projector shelf for all to see and announced, "You fine me $600 for teaching my son to fish. You lied, you forged, you bullied. I paid your debt, I took your crown, and now for the next century, you're banned from touching this lake again." The applause felt like thunder. Rachel squeezed my hand as I looked across the room at Noah, who for the first time in weeks smiled wide and proud. And standing on that stage with her lies crumbling and her empire exposed, Gloria Hale finally understood. Her reign of terror was finished, and the board had flipped so violently she'd never recover. The weeks after the community meeting felt like living inside the eye of a storm that had finally cracked open into daylight, neighbors whispering, reporters circling, investigators filing deeper into evidence drawers than anyone had thought possible, and at the center of it all, Gloria Hale shrinking from queen of the cul-de-sac to defendant in an orange jumpsuit with shackled wrists, because the morning her forged federal documents were collected and photographed by real federal agents was the morning her power died, and soon after, subpoenas began flying like warning shots. In the days that followed, I was called into the courthouse to deliver testimony, not as the humiliated man she had tried to find on a dock, not as the neighbor she called 911 on, but as the resident who had cleared the lake's $15,000 debt and secured a binding control contract stretching 99 years forward. A man now holding the legitimacy she had pretended to wield, and I remember the first day walking into that courtroom, heavy wooden doors groaning as they swung open, the ceiling tall and reverent with sun angling down through stained windows, the benches lined with neighbors who had once cowered under her letters now seated with wary eyes to watch their tormentor brought low. At the prosecution table stood William Parker, my attorney friend, files stacked like bricks of ammunition, while at the defense table slumped Gloria, stripped of her navy blazer and visor crown, her hair tangled, her face blotched with exhaustion, wearing a county-issued orange that clashed with her desperate attempts to maintain an air of authority. The judge, a stern woman who clearly had little patience for theatrics, wasted no time in laying the stage. Multiple counts of fraud, forgery of government seals, embezzlement of HOA funds, harassment and false reporting, and obstruction of justice tied to her months of harassment campaigns. Each charge was read aloud like an iron bell tolling, and every toll chipped another stone off her crumbling facade. When the prosecution began presenting evidence, I watched Parker deliver it like a hammer. Video of Gloria cutting my fence at dawn with bolt cutters, audio of her calling 911 screaming that I was armed, neighbors testifying about absurd fines for flower pots and flags, elderly Mrs. Chin trembling at the stand as she recalled being exempt from quiet hour warnings while families with children were slapped with hundreds of dollars in penalties. Then George Miller, our stalwart elderly resident, walked slowly to the witness chair and with steady hands dropped envelopes into the evidence tray, letters from Clearwater ignored by the HOA, copies of his own journal logging dates Gloria levied charges without reason, and testimony that her behavior was dictatorial for years but amplified once I became her target. Amanda's voice cracked as she told the court, under oath, of nights spent forging board signatures, fabricating false meeting minutes at Gloria's command, watching thousands of dollars vanish out of the HOA account into maintenance that amounted to landscaping Gloria's personal yard or fixing her pool. Every neighbor slouching in the gallery stiffened when they realized their dues had been siphoned into her empire, and mutters of anger rolled like thunder through the room. It wasn't just my family she had attacked, she had stolen from them all. When my turn came, I stood steady, handed the judge copies of the Clearwater contract with my name and their signatures, showing how the debt was cleared not by their leader but by me, a private resident who fulfilled the very obligations she abandoned, and I declared plainly that the HOA no longer had legal standing over the lake. The judge leafed through pages, adjusted glasses, and raised her head toward the defense table, asking Gloria if she had any rebuttal, at which point the room held its breath as the woman once so loud and commanding whispered, "Those documents are irrelevant, our community guidelines supersede them." The court burst into low chuckles of disbelief, the judge's gavel rapping firmly to silence the gallery, and Parker simply said, "Irrelevant? Clearwater granted binding authority, Your Honor, because of her breach of fiduciary duty. Her guidelines hold as much weight as paper napkins compared to signed contracts and state law." By this moment even her attorney looked resigned, only going through motions, knowing the trial was less about winning and more about mitigating collapse. When closing statements rang out, Parker's voice climbed with conviction, painting her not as some misguided HOA president with a taste for rules, but as a calculating fraud who terrorized families, traumatized children like my boy, and used forged government authority to hide her embezzlement. He said, "She fined a man $600 for fishing with his child, when all along she was sinking this community under $15,000 of secret debt and $30,000 more she quietly pocketed. Justice cannot allow her fraud to remain unpunished." Her attorney muttered about community standards and overzealous mistakes, but his words fell flat like a broken reed instrument. Finally, the judge delivered the reckoning, guilty on counts of embezzlement, forgery, harassment, and fiduciary breach, sentenced to repay $25,000 in restitution to residents, stripped permanently from HOA activity, fined under federal law for falsifying documents, and sentenced to probation with pending investigations that could still carry heavier criminal penalties as more accounts were examined. The sound of her gavel cracked not like paper, it cracked like stone splitting under weight. Gloria gasped, shoulders sagging as deputies moved behind her chair, and when she rose for the last time from her throne of lies, she shuffled pale and weak, no applause left for her theatrics, only silence heavy as judgment itself. After court adjourned, neighbors surrounded me in the marble hallways, some shaking my hand firmly, some with tears in their eyes apologizing for ever doubting, Mrs. Chin bowing slightly and whispering, "Thank you for saving our lake." Amanda hugged Rachel with relief, eyes finally clear of fear's cloud. George Miller stood by the doors declaring that the community must vote to dissolve the HOA completely, and the words carried cheers echoing off the chamber ceilings. Within weeks, that vote was taken, the HOA dissolved by overwhelming majority, signs of rules torn down, community guidelines replaced with resident consensus moderated by volunteers, disputes solved at kitchen tables instead of mailed threats. Gloria's empty house sat dark, for sale nailed to her lawn, rust gathering on her abandoned golf cart. My family walked to the lake often now with rods in hand, Noah's laughter returning as he hooked fish under golden sunsets, no live streamers lurking, no citations waved across the dock, only peace layered with the memory of battle we fought to earn it. And as neighbors gathered for our first No HOA community cookout, smoke rising into a twilight sky, children running free on grass that once stood under strict surveillance, I realized this fight had become a legend already, whispered from neighbor to neighbor as the day the queen fell, the story of the locked gate, the $600 fine that stole a throne. And I knew as I looked at the water flowing calm, my son joyfully teaching younger kids how to bait their lines, that justice is slow, sometimes messy, sometimes traumatic, but when it arrives like floodwater, clearing rot from the banks and leaving the land fertile for peace. By the time the leaves began to shift into their autumn golds and coppers again, the neighborhood felt entirely different, as if someone had finally opened a window in a stuffy room and let the air blow clean, and walking down the cul-de-sac no longer carried the tightness in my chest it once did when Gloria's watchful eyes lingered behind every curtain or her golf cart prowled like a patrol car. Now the HOA office stood empty, the letters of authority stripped from its door, and the community that had once cowered under rules about lawn heights and mailbox paint found itself laughing, barbecuing, meeting at picnic tables near the lake and solving disagreements with conversations instead of fines, their voices lighter without the weight of arbitrary power pressing down. My lake. Those words still made me pause every time I said them, still tasted like some impossible twist of fate, shimmered calmly under the sun, legally mine thanks to the 99-year contract I had secured by swallowing a $15,000 debt Gloria thought no one would pay. By then the contract itself had been printed, notarized, displayed for anyone who still questioned its validity, and even skeptics were forced to admit that I had done what she never could, I had backed my family not with noise but with action, with resources, with a willingness to stake everything to protect peace. At night when the crickets hummed and the water glistened silver under moonlight, Rachel would sometimes sit beside me on the porch swing and shake her head with a disbelieving smile, whispering, "A $600 fine, and now we own the lake." And each time I'd chuckle, not out of smugness but out of the kind of irony life throws your way when arrogance collides with patience and gets demolished. Noah too had shifted, the boy who once trembled when police lights reflected off the dock now ran ahead of me carrying his rod proudly, daring fish to challenge him like he was conquering not just the water but his memories. He laughed again while reeling in bass, and sometimes, when he saw younger kids from the neighborhood struggling to bait their hooks, he gathered them in like a little instructor, showing them tricks I had taught him, and I saw healing in his grin, the trauma pushed out by confidence and joy. Many weekends neighbors joined in, families who had once stood quietly afraid of Gloria's wrath now happily unpacking coolers, spreading blankets, sharing stories about how the former HOA president fined them for toys left on lawns or for chalk drawings on sidewalks, their words tinged with disbelief at how long they had let one voice dictate so much. And I realized that the dissolution of the HOA wasn't merely the end of corruption, it was the rediscovery of trust, of community shaping itself around cooperation instead of fear. At the next community meeting, held not with gavels or official citations but with bowls of chili and mugs of coffee, George Miller stood with a weary but proud nod and said, "We won't forget this, not because of how bitter it was under her but because it showed us we can govern ourselves with honesty." And everyone clapped not for me alone but for the idea we had reclaimed together, that a neighborhood wasn't meant to serve one ruler, it was meant to serve each other. Of course, Gloria herself remained the dark cautionary tale in local rumor, her house eventually sold at a loss, her name whispered in other towns where she had pulled similar tricks, her probation hearings keeping her tangled in court systems she could no longer manipulate, and sometimes strangers would drive slowly through Meadowbrook to see the place where that HOA queen was dethroned, their eyes inevitably drifting toward the locked steel gate at the path by the lake where a fresh wooden sign read "Private Property, Lakekeeper, Bennett," its letters carved by hand, plain but firm, and neighbors had started calling the whole saga simply the legend of the lake. I never intended to be legend material, I only wanted to show my son how to fish, but legends often start in ordinary places where someone finally says no, and that morning on the dock when she shoved a citation into my hands live streaming to the whole neighborhood was the first domino falling toward all this. Looking back, the satisfaction wasn't in acquiring the lake itself but in knowing that tyranny collapsed not under louder shouting but under the simple weight of truth, steady preparation, patience, and the willingness to act decisively when the right moment came. When I sat down to balance the books of the community fund after court ordered Gloria to repay stolen money, it felt less like paperwork and more like cutting away weeds to let soil breathe again, and seeing elderly neighbors like Mrs. Chin get refunds for money she thought gone forever reminded me that justice is sweetest not in personal revenge but when the whole village feels its relief. Rachel told me she finally slept through the night without waking at every car passing. Noah's nightmares fizzled into dreams about monster fish he wanted to catch, and I felt in my bones that the ghosts Gloria left behind were finally dissolving. One late summer evening, Noah caught his first largemouth bass right on our dock, and as Rachel clapped and he grinned with the rod bending, I couldn't help raising my glass of orange juice in a quiet toast to the water, whispering to myself, this right here was worth it. The neighborhood didn't just survive Gloria's reign, it grew stronger because of it. The lake became a bond tying us together instead of a weapon used against us, and as autumn winds rustled, I realized sometimes life plays the cruelest pranks to set up the best punchlines. She fined me $600 for fishing, and in the end I own 99 years of fishing, swimming, and peace she could never touch again. They say legends are exaggerated tales, bent with time into folklore, but maybe some legends are simply the truth told clearly. A father, a son, a fishing pole, a corrupt queen of a cul-de-sac, and the lake that outlasted her arrogance, glowing steady every morning as if mocking her memory, whispering you can't cage water and you can't own people with lies.